I think the entire landscape of online marketing is going to get flipped on its head in the coming years as Google continues to kind of scrape the web and just deliver content directly in its feed. You can see it with the reviews that are happening, like Yelp, all of these, TripAdvisor, they're all under the gun because where do people go when they're trying to plan a trip? They go to Google first, and then they eventually hope that they'll land on a TripAdvisor. But now that Google has reviews directly on their site, then that's emptying that entire review market where Google's taking control over it. Same with airplanes. If you're trying to book a flight, you can do that directly through Google. And I think it's going to continue to get worse, which means brands and marketers need to invest in distribution. The idea of content being king and content ruling everything around us is no longer a reality. I believe that distribution is becoming more and more important and that distribution needs to be focused on.
Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart Podcast with Jefflytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 64th episode, we're going to talk with Ross Simmons, who's the founder of Foundation Marketing, a content marketing consultancy, and also the co-founder of two startups. One of those is running things at Crate, a SaaS for product marketers. And in addition to that, Hustle and Grind, an e-commerce site for coffee-loving startup professionals. Now, you probably heard that introduction and you wonder to yourself, how is this guy involved with so many projects and how are they going to be successful? And to that question, I say stay tuned. Ross will tell us all about that and a lot more in his interview. But before we get to the goods, I wanted to talk a little bit about how Ross came across my radar. It was earlier this year at the MN Search Summit where I met a few of our other awesome guests from this podcast. And after my presentation was done and things went well, I wanted to sit in on some other presenters and see what was going on. Now, the conference lineup was so strong that it was literally a murder's row of speakers at 11:30, the time that Ross had. And so I had a tough time choosing which one to go visit. Now, before I tell you whose talk I chose, I should address the elephant in the room, and that's that I literally just called all of the speakers murderers. This is a surefire sign that the use of the word literally has gotten out of hand. So back to my choice for speakers at 11:30. I did not choose Ross's presentation because I wanted to hear Maddie Carey, and also his room was pretty darn full. And so I regret not being able to clone myself and watch both of them, but Maddie's presentation was awesome. But it turns out that Ross literally blew up our Twitter MN Summit hashtag with his awesome presentation on content marketing. People's minds were blown. Oh, the carnage that we witnessed that day. And if you didn't notice, that's another play on the word literally being used too much. Because I missed Ross's presentation, I'm actually the only person who's living to tell about that day that happened in Minnesota. And that, my friend, is how you tell a story. And maybe I should just stop babbling and just give you what you came to hear. An amazing tale of entrepreneurship, content marketing, and success. Let's get into my chat with Ross Simmons. Visit jefflytics.com/thecoolestcool for show notes. Okay, we're here today with Ross Simmons. Ross, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Jeff, I'm excited to chat with you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited as well. We crossed paths at the MN Search Summit, and that was a lot of fun. And I'm glad that we can talk about it because I want to learn about your history and I want to learn a lot about you. So let's start it off with the first question we ask everybody, and that is, what is the first project or breakthrough you had that got you into this world of the internet or digital marketing, whatever you want to call it?
So it started for me while I was in university. Like most students who are kind of jumping into university, not necessarily loving it, I was getting bored of reading about Shakespeare, reading about Hamlet, and all of these like old literature texts that just really had no relevance to me. I couldn't connect with it. And I had to write these reports on it. I had to write these papers, and I always liked writing, but I didn't really like writing about things that I wasn't interested in. So one of my passions has always been sports and football in particular. And fantasy football just started to kind of take off. It was starting to get popular, and I decided, okay, instead of writing about things that aren't interesting to me, I'm going to start like a side project where I can actually get excited about something that I'm doing on a regular basis. And I started a fantasy football blog. So every single day throughout the entire football season, I was publishing blog posts, creating content about fantasy football. And this was when I was like 19, 20, living in my parents' basement, drinking instant coffee. Had no reputation in the marketing world or in the world in general, but people were listening to me, my recommendations around who they should start on their fantasy team. They were listening to me around who I was predicting to be the MVP of the year. And this content started getting picked up by some big sites. So some large fantasy sites started to feature my content. They were quoting me. I think they all thought I was like a 30-year-old expert in this stuff. But I was like a kid living in my parents' basement, creating content about fantasy sports, and people were loving it. So I got to a point then where I kind of transitioned it into an affiliate site where I was making some money off of like Amazon and things like that. But I also was selling a few info products around who you should start and who you should sit on your fantasy lineup. And that kind of opened my eyes to the entire world of digital. As the fantasy blog views went up, the marks went down, and my mom made me shut down my blog. Until this day, I say to her, "Mom, I could have been on ESPN if you didn't do it." But essentially, I then transitioned from writing about football and started writing about marketing on RossSimmons.com. And that was kind of a key pivotal moment for me in terms of the marketing career, because I started to document my thoughts and my processes and what I was learning about marketing the same way I was writing about what I was learning about fantasy football, except it just went into a different industry. So that was really the beginning. I fell in love with the idea of being able to live anywhere in the world, connect with people from all over the globe, deliver them value through nothing but keyboard and pixels and passion. And it just kind of took off from there.
That's awesome. I mean, that's exactly why we do this, right? That's why we got into this whole internet marketing thing. But it's fascinating that you had some realizations that early on that I think a lot of people might not have, and that is, one, how to get people to pay attention to you. So that's
right.
Remarkable in itself that one of your first, or if not your first, website was successful. But then how do you then monetizing, and how do you try to make money off this? How do you take the next step? Where did you turn to at that time to get that insight?
So I was just like a geek. So I don't really think, I didn't think about things like from a marketing lens. I really just thought about it as somebody who was obsessed with fantasy sports, obsessed with sports in general, and wanted to be around people who were like-minded. So I knew that people who were also obsessed with fantasy football were spending time on forums talking about fantasy football. So I went into those communities and I was delivering people my blog posts. I was delivering value, answering questions. I was hosting like AMAs where people could ask me anything and I would answer their questions. And I wasn't doing any of that understanding like the marketing value that came with it. I was doing those things simply because I wanted to talk about sports. I simply wanted to connect with people. And then looking back, I can definitely reverse engineer the tactics that I took that allowed the blog and the website to be successful. But in the moment, I was kind of just going with my gut. I'm sure I spent some time like reading about how to make money and things like that online. But I really do believe it was more of like an organic kind of just winging it and figuring it out as I went along. It wasn't really like a lot of structure. Like nobody taught me in university about Google. No one taught about Twitter. No one taught about SERPs. Like that, those words just weren't things that people talked about. So it's a lot of self-education. And I think for any digital marketer, anybody who's listening to this, if you are trying to create a career and a job for yourself that is going to be sustainable for the next few years, it's not going to come from the lessons and the insights that you've learned in the past. It's going to come from your ability to kind of get your hands dirty and learn about what's happening next with like voice search and with the importance of distribution and really just double down on the trends that are happening around us, or you're just going to eventually kind of fade away.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think people always think there's a magic formula. And actually, if you're successful, you can say, this was my magic formula to doing this. This is why I did it. Like we could take this podcast and turn it into Ross's magic formula. Right. But ultimately, it just came down to you just did the things that you see other people doing and the things that you wanted to see.
Exactly.
Like, I think a lot of people who are successful, they just like, well, nobody's doing this and I can. Or I'm not sure if I can or not, but at least I'm going to give it a try.
Right, 100%. And I think that that's one of the key pieces that a lot of people overlook is whenever you're going into a new space or you're trying to do something new, there is somebody out there in the world who has done something similar, and you can take inspiration from them, revise it to kind of fit your needs and what your kind of knowledge base already is, and then just double down on that. So I think you raised a great point there, Jeff, around the idea of like, look at what other people have done, reverse engineer it, study it, and then use that to kind of act as your blueprint for how you're going to proceed.
Yeah, but I also like what you're saying about how you can do that as much as you can, but also don't rely too much on it, and also take your own path. which is sort of cool. And obviously, then you said the next step beyond the fantasy site was your sort of path was chosen for you, and then it wasn't that.
Right.
And then so you're like, okay, well, at least I try something else. Were you still in school then when you started your own website, or
I was
the
still in
timeline here?
school. I was obsessed with Mad Men, so Mad Men had just came out and it was pretty popular. So I transitioned from like the fantasy side to the advertising side, and I called myself Thoughts of a Modern Day Madman. And that was kind of like what the original RossSimmons.com was all about. I can look at the branding. If you go into that Wayback Machine, you'll see some of it. It was pretty bad. But yeah, that was what I doubled down on. I wanted to kind of break into the advertising world. And I knew that if I wanted to get a job in this space, I needed to differentiate myself. Like I was just like everybody else with a degree, walking across the stage in marketing. And that was it. So how was I going to differentiate myself from the rest of the pack? Everybody else had great resumes. I wasn't an A-plus student. I needed to find a way to stand out. And the best way that I thought I could do that was to put on showcase my thinking and the way that I look at the world as it relates to digital marketing and double down on something that some people were avoiding. So at the time, I was jumping into the space while social was still relatively new. So I could write about what I was learning. I could write about predictions around Facebook's growth and why it's going to be a channel that's worth paying attention to. And at the time, those were things that people didn't really understand. So that gave me an advantage when I was coming from a point of weakness where no one knew who I was. I was able to come in and share thoughts on trends and ideas, and that allowed me to differentiate myself in the market.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have a success indicator at the time? Was it just to get noticed? Was it comments? Was it traffic to your site? Or did you just do it just to try it out?
So I was definitely watching visits to my website. So I was looking at how many people were visiting my site. That was kind of like the key metric because it meant I was getting people's attention. How many people were following me on Twitter was definitely an important insight back then. I wasn't a sophisticated marketer at this point, but I was definitely looking at more of the vanity metrics. But the vanity metrics actually made sense at the time because I was coming from a point where no one knew me. So I was looking to see if people locally started to follow me on Twitter in the marketing space. And then as they started to, I started to kind of send out direct messages and be like, hey, I want to grab a coffee with you. I don't know much about the marketing scene locally, but I would love to pick your brain and chat with you about what somebody who's new in the industry or trying to break into the industry should do. And that was a pivotal point for me because it allowed me to kind of establish a network that I didn't have before. And then by creating content, I can remember writing blog posts that were like 20 books that every marketing grad needs to read before they get a job in advertising, before I actually had a job in advertising. People were like loving it and sharing the content and saying this is a great post, but I never actually had a job in advertising at the time.
Did you at least read the books?
I did read the books. I love reading. My
it.
library is pretty extensive. I'm a big book fan.
That's great. So you're obviously like learning these skills or living these skills really is what I'd say. Like you're living out these skills that you think you need to have in the real world. I think we all have this romantic vision of advertising agencies and Mad Men might perpetuate that like right. These people have their stuff together and that it's like the pinnacle of like business. And right. then when you go into them, was it that way for you? Did you even get a chance to do that? What did you do next after college?
I did. So I did end up, I had a couple gigs. So I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Like I love creating things. And it was definitely what kind of a consistency across all of my jobs. So I got a job with the CBC, which is a public broadcaster in Canada, where I was the first person to implement like the social media strategy on the East Coast of Canada. So I trained the reporters, trained their journalists, helped them kind of develop a marketing strategy and help them execute that. That was kind of my first step. At that point, I decided I was going to quit and I was going to start my own agency. So again, entrepreneurship always pushed me to kind of wanting to scratch my own niche. So I quit that, started my own gig, and I was making great money with CBC, but I decided to go and do my own thing, even though it was a bit irrational. I had no experience running an agency, didn't know what an agency looked like inside, but I made that leap. Then I did get an offer from a bigger agency to kind of come in-house. So I did that for 2.5 years, quit again and started up my own company. And that this time it was actually for good. And I've been out on my own ever since. So I did spend 2.5 years in a bigger agency, working with brands from all over the world. I had a great experience there, was able to learn the ins and outs that I didn't know the first time I tried to start an agency, and it's been smooth sailing ever since. And when I say smooth sailing, I definitely mean ups and downs, because entrepreneurship is quite the ride.
Yeah, I was gonna say entrepreneurship's never rational.
Yeah.
Like, yes, any decision you make to go out on your own, and nobody ever understands it until they've done it, and then they're like, okay. Or actually, entrepreneurs understand it.
Right.
Not everybody else does.
Exactly.
And so I definitely. I mean, actually, similar in my boat. I started my own agency, and then I was like, well, man, I have to figure out how to do payroll.
Right.
I have to figure out how to hire somebody. I need to figure out like contracts, everything. Like, I have to figure out how to run a business. And I was like, okay. And so I joined another agency as well for several years, because I was like, man, I need this. I don't understand how any of this stuff works.
Exactly.
I want to learn it from the inside, and I want those resources. Yeah. And then once you learn enough, once you get to that point, then it's like, okay, you can go back out and now be successful.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah, you have to learn and understand how the industry operates before you can kind of, I hate the word to say it, but like disrupt the industry. Like, you need to understand what it is you're going into before you just like try to knock down all the doors. There can be some value in going into something without the biases that come from spending time in an industry. But at the same time, I think learning about pricing, learning about how they manage client operations, client relationships, payroll, like you said, all of those things are important. And I believe played a pivotal role in allowing me to kind of use that as my launching pad to kickstart kind of my third act of my career.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think that there's so many ways to do it, right? There's no perfect blueprint, but I think it's prescient to have that perspective, like that you need to do that this is something that's necessary, and be able to learn from it. And it's probably tough to do it. It's probably good and bad, but I agree that, everybody gets there in different ways, but it's super valuable to see, like, if you're trying to disrupt, and yes, that word gets overused sometimes, but in this case, it is what it is.
Right.
It is disrupt, and actually, it is what it is probably the worst phrase ever. I didn't mean it in that way, actually, but it you have to understand it to really get there. Otherwise, you're sort of going against something, and so now at least you understand not so much what you're going against, but what you're up against, right? Exactly. And so that's cool. Yeah. Great. So you go into the, obviously you're an entrepreneur, and when you sent me what you're into both the agency, and then you have several other businesses running as well. What do you do? How do you balance these things? What gives you the motivation to do this, and how do you spend time between the different things, and what are those other businesses?
For sure. So my motivation has always been kind of this idea of kind of having flexibility to live life on my own terms. I've always wanted to be able to kind of look back at my life and be able to die happy knowing I tried everything that I could, everything that I wanted to, and things like that. So I think that creating a bunch of new businesses comes from the fact that I recognize that the time on earth is limited, and I wanted to try different things. I want to try to create physical products. I want to try to create a SaaS product. I want to deliver value for brands all over the world as a marketer. Like, these are things that I've always wanted to do, and by running multiple businesses, it gives me that opportunity. The management of my time and being able to balance it all comes from two things. The first thing is surrounding myself with some amazing people. So I have a great team, people who are self-starters. We're all remote. We work from our homes, from coffee shops all across Canada, and we do great work together. We've got designers and writers spread out all over, and we're essentially just dedicated to delivering valuable content to our clients, but also delivering valuable products to our customers. So by having those types of people around you, it makes life way easier, because you can trust and rely on them to kind of pick up the balls when you're dropping them. The next piece that is very important is I live and die by my calendar. So if something isn't in my calendar, it typically doesn't get done. A lot of people will send me a message and they're like, Ross, can you jump on a call in 5 minutes? Definitely not. Like, it's just not possible. My calendar is usually booked up with things that I want to do. They're my priorities. It's the tasks that I have to accomplish. And if I don't accomplish them, it's going to mess up the rest of my week. So I try to stay very structured around what I'm doing on an hourly basis, whether that's professional life, whether that's personal life. everything goes into my calendar, and I live and die by that. And I think that it's the best thing that I've ever done. I've been using a calendar for years. I remember when it initially was a piece of paper and notepad, and every morning I would draw out what I was going to do at different times. Now with iCal and Google Calendar, life is way better. But calendar systems has definitely been the biggest benefit for me to ensure that I'm able to kind of balance it.
Yeah,
because I think at the end of the day, for a lot of people, if you look at your calendar and you look at what you're doing with your time, and at the end of each week I do this, I evaluate what I did from Monday to Friday. And I say, okay, that's where my priorities are. So if I see that I'm spending a lot of time on one brand and not spending a lot of time on another brand, then I can say, okay, I might have to readjust this next week because I didn't give enough love to this brand or to this client. So I think that using your calendar is a great quantifiable metric to see where your priorities lies. And when you're doing it from a personal life as well, you can see when there's trends around your fitness is going to fall off because you haven't gone to the gym in 5 weeks. Like you can see those things in your calendar and you can make adjustments based off of it. So I love calendar apps and I use it every day.
Yeah, that's an important point. I think time management is one of the toughest things for entrepreneurs. I think it's a little bit, maybe it's a little bit easier if we have a job that you know you need to go to and sort of the job tells you what you do with your time. But from an entrepreneurship standpoint, you're right that it becomes, if you don't have it in there, then it's just the loudest person ultimately. It's a squeaky wheel type thing. So you have to have some kind of planning. I found that as I foray into my third act into entrepreneurship, I think that also you just get so much better at estimating your time, like how much time it's going to take to do something and what's realistic to expect as well.
Right. Yeah. And it gives you, and it makes it easier for you to project like how much time it's going to take you to do something for a client. So if you have your calendar already booked up for the following week in terms of tasks, and somebody comes into the door and they're like, I need this report delivered. Do you have time to deliver it next week? You can look at next week and see what your schedule's like and then give them an accurate estimate. No, sorry, I can't do it. It's just not going to work. I love calendars and I think everybody needs to embrace them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even this podcast, for example, we give you a link and you can schedule it and then you can check it with yours. But also, it's nice because I knew that I had several podcasts coming up the end of this week. We're doing this on a Friday, and that meant that I had to get everything done earlier in the week, right? Otherwise, nothing was going to get done. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to work really hard until Wednesday, and then the last part of the week, it's recording podcasts, so I can't do the same level of work. And so that's sort of how you have to cope with these things. And time management is really important when you're doing several things. Now, I should say that I'll introduce this offline, or I'll introduce this at the beginning of the episode of what you're working on. But what are some of these businesses, and what do the businesses do? I should let you explain that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I have Foundation Marketing, which is my consulting business. We work with B2B brands, startups, enterprise companies who are looking to essentially create great content and distribute that content effectively. So we help with the actual act of creating the content, whether that's blog posts, ebooks, landing pages, email automation campaigns. We develop that content, and then we assist with the actual distribution, which is finding the communities in which their audience is spending time, which could be a Facebook group, it could be a Slack channel, it could be simply understanding that they're using Facebook and managing the paid social ads. And then we distribute that content to that audience in a way that's going to drive home a meaningful result for that client. That could be a lead, that could be a customer, it could be a sign up, it could be just increasing organic traffic. All of those different KPIs kind of come into the mix with Foundation. Then I have Crate, which is a SaaS product. So Crate is a social media management tool that I kind of built to scratch my own itch. So early on in my career, a lot of people were coming to me to manage their social media accounts. And one of the biggest tasks that kind of made me pull out my hair was the idea of every single day waking up and looking for new content to share on their Twitter account. I would have to spend time digging through newsletters, digging through forums, digging through communities to find out what the latest and greatest article was that I should be sharing on their Twitter account. Rather than doing that, I thought, why don't we automate this? Why don't we create a system that automatically scans the web, looks at some of the most popular Twitter accounts within a specific industry, within a specific niche, and then deliver them the articles that they should be sharing on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn every single day in a simple, easy-to-use screen. So we built out this product. It's fully automated. There's no humans on the other end, where we are essentially looking at different industries across a wide variety of different kind of spaces and sectors to kind of deliver people the type of content that they should be sharing on Twitter, the type of content they should be sharing on social, which ultimately allows them to kind of curate content with ease. So some people use it for social, some people use it to curate their weekly newsletters. It's a tool essentially that makes it easy to curate great content, regardless of your industry, regardless of the topic. We have people curating content about antiques. We have people curating content about psychology, about diversity, about Settlers of Catan, like you name it. We've got people using Crate to kind of find content on a variety of different topics. The other brand that I have is Hustle and Grind. So Hustle and Grind, again, scratching my own itch, was built out of this idea that I just love coffee and I drink a lot of it, and I needed to find a way to kind of write it off. Kind of kidding. But at the same time, I started a coffee company. So I always wanted to create a physical product. So Hustle and Grind, hence the name Grind, is a coffee company that essentially delivers people great coffee whenever they want it. We have a great dark roast, but we also have an element of this brand that is deeply rooted in entrepreneurship, freelancers, and this kind of lifestyle that we were talking about earlier about kind of wanting to take control of your own life. So we sell posters, we sell hoodies, we sell coffee mugs, we sell t-shirts, we sell information products that help people become better entrepreneurs. And we have built up a significant following through Instagram. So our Instagram community is over 110,000 people. We've been able to sell products to brands all over the world. We have customers all over the world, and it's done extremely well for us. It's really a media platform as much of an e-commerce site where we have an active blog where people are contributing their thoughts and their ideas on marketing, on entrepreneurship, on productivity. And our goal with this business is really just to inspire more people to take control of their own lives and drink great coffee while doing it.
I love it. I mean, it's probably my favorite name of a company that I've ever heard. Honestly, it's really high up there.
Awesome.
Especially
Thanks,
after hearing you describe what you do. I love it because it's exactly what it is. It's like you're hustling with your business and drinking some good coffee along the way.
That's it.
It's funny. I actually, this is probably a good segue too, because I wanted to talk a little bit about going beyond SEO. But when like 10, 15 years ago, I created a coffee website, an e-commerce coffee website where you could buy online with a credit card. This is before even like big commerce was out. It was really, really hard to create an e-commerce website. It was a significant infrastructure investment. It was expensive. It was, probably, a couple $1,000s just to even get started. And then you had to like figure out authorize.net. You had to do everything you could imagine in order to like get somebody to pay with a credit card. There's a lot of it's way easier now. Just if anybody's thinking about starting a business, it's easier now than it was in 2005, I think, when I started doing it. But it was importing coffee from the Netherlands. It was called Smitten Doorless Coffee, and somebody had vacation and they just really wanted to sell it, or they wanted this coffee. And we thought we could do it with just SEO and Google AdWords. Right. And it was all right, but it was like, I think the difference is that being interested in coffee is one thing, but people don't feel as passionate about it unless it's the only way they can find that coffee. The way they differentiate is to turn it into some kind of lifestyle product, right?
Exactly.
Or some kind of, basically the content is people using the product. So I really like what you're saying about how it's basically coffee is a product of the marketing and vice versa. So that's really cool.
Exactly.
And so what I wanted to ask you is content marketing in general, how it's not just a way to manipulate Google, and then just some other channels that are out there. So I know you as the content marketing guy. I'm sure you're capable of many things, but maybe just give a little background as to what content marketing is to you and what you're using it for.
For sure. So a bit of background on kind of some of my expertise as it relates to kind of content marketing in general. I've been in the content game since university with the Fantasy Football blog, but the real kind of pivotal moment for me was this idea of experiments with content. So on a yearly basis, I run experiments on different channels, on different networks to kind of see how to kind of leverage them to drive results. And then I can apply that learning and those insights to my customers and to my clients. Recently, I've experimented with channels like Reddit, been able to get to the front page multiple times over and over again, kind of crack the Reddit code, one of those channels that a lot of people kind of, when marketers hear about Reddit, they're like, oh, no, we have to stay away. And I get that 100%. Like, if you go into Reddit and you market people, they will reject you. That's a reality. As somebody who loves Reddit as a user, the worst thing is when a marketer goes into Reddit and they try to just like spam you and submit content and submit links without actually understanding the type of content that people want. And that's really an intent of mine. It's to kind of understand the people behind the computer screen and what they want and what they need from content, and then deliver them that. So SlideShare is another channel where I've been able to generate millions of views, probably close to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of deals directly through SlideShare marketing. And it came from, again, understanding and studying that channel to get an understanding of what it is that people wanted to accomplish on the other end. And then from there, actually investing time and energy in delivering that to them. So for me, in my definition, content marketing is very simple. It's understanding who your audience is, understanding their motivations, their needs, and their wants, and then delivering them valuable insights, information, or entertainment in a format and on a channel that they currently use. And that's really cut and dry what it's all about. And if you can do that, I think that you can be successful. A lot of people get caught up in this idea of if you create content, everybody will come to you. And I think one of the key pieces that is often overlooked is the idea of creating that content and then placing it into the channels and the communities that they actually are spending time on. It's easy to say, I'm going to write a blog post, 5 things that you should do before you start a podcast. It's a whole different ballgame when I start to go into podcasting communities, have a conversation with people, add value to the questions, to the discussions happening, and then drop a link to my website and to my answer. Like, it's a whole different type of interaction, and that's what people really want. They want that authentic engagement with you, but they also want you to go where they are rather than them always having to find you.
Yeah, exactly. And those communities exist. It's finding them and then understanding them, right? That seems like a big important piece here, because I would agree. I mean, well, one thing I'm interested in general is just like the redistribution of content. So I think maybe 10 years ago when other people were involved, it was like pretty obvious that what you do is you just you create a blog and then good things are going to happen to you. There's, maybe people still, even 2017, are hardly figuring out YouTube, at least the people who had one paradigm. So a lot of people that I know in my generation, we were SEO is king and that's it. There's no queen. It's just like, just do what you can for SEO and then hopefully stuff works. And obviously people are getting smarter now, but I think that there's still that bias is like, well, if it's not important to Google, then it's not important. And so how do you balance that? Like, how would you choose to repurpose a piece of content that maybe 10 years ago would have been written form? How do you know that that's good for Instagram? Is it the brand that you're promoting? Is it where the people are hanging out? How do you judge that?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things there, right? Like, I think when you talk about the idea of creating content and then Google serving it up and that being what we hang our hat on, I think that entire idea needs to be debunked, right? Like, you need to recognize, like, Google doesn't care as much anymore as they used to about your domain authority. They don't care about how many links you're getting. If you go through like a Moz, you go through an Ahrefs, and you look at what's showing up when you do a search for kombucha, it makes no sense. And it's because right now Google is basing things off of a handful of different variables that a lot of SEOs just have no idea what's going on. And anyone who tells you that they can guarantee you to be the top ranked thing, like, run away afraid, because they have no clue. Google is trying to increase shareholder value. And when they're trying to increase shareholder value, they're going to prioritize their own content and their own efforts over anyone else. So if Google starts to send people to your website, they're losing you as a visitor. If you look closely at what is happening with featured snippets, with some of the images that are showing directly in search, when you're seeing comparison pages showing directly in search, a lot of the landing pages that we would have created 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and had done extremely well with, are now just being scraped by Google and delivered directly in the search result. And when that is happening, I think that people need to recognize that it's becoming more and more important to not rely on Google, but to rely on your own communities, your own channels, and rely on distribution. Because Google's just delivering your info directly in the search result now. They're scraping lyrics, they're scraping comparison pages. If you do a search for like, what's the best camera, they're going to show them to you. They're not going to take you to a landing page that I developed with a handful of affiliate links to Amazon. They're going to take that content and they're going to deliver it directly into search. And the only way that I believe in the future you're going to be able to overcome that is going to be by investing heavily in your own distribution channels. And that's like email lists. That's building out your own communities where you can seed content. That's building trust with people so you know that they rely on you as a valuable resource. I think the entire landscape of online marketing is going to get flipped on its head in the coming years as Google continues to kind of scrape the web and just deliver content directly in its feed. You can see it with the reviews that are happening, like Yelp, all of these, TripAdvisor. They're all under the gun because where do people go when they're trying to plan a trip? They go to Google first, and then they eventually hope that they'll land on a TripAdvisor. But now that Google has reviews directly on their site, then okay, that's emptying that entire review market where Google's taking control over it. Same with airplanes. If you're trying to book a flight, you can do that directly through Google. And I think it's going to continue to get worse, which means brands and marketers need to invest in distribution. The idea of content being king and content ruling everything around us is no longer a reality. I believe that distribution is becoming more and more important, and that distribution needs to be focused on. And we need to look at channels like YouTube. And when you're talking about that redistribution of your content, that's where this all comes into play. We need to create our content and then redistribute it through podcasts, through YouTube, through SlideShare. You need to think about how you can redistribute that on Instagram through a post that's going to drive people to a link in your bio. You need to also share that post on Medium.com, on LinkedIn.com. You need to find a forum where your target audience is spending tons of time and then seed that content into the discussion. You need to go to Quora and you have to answer questions about your industry and your product. You have to constantly be putting in the time and the energy to distribute your content across multiple channels. Otherwise, you're just going to be lost in a sea of noise.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I do think that the days of Google being the hub and the only place that's out there, it's like Google used to be the product that we'd put out there. You create content, Google finds it, and that's traffic. But that's either long gone or on its way to long gone, like you said. But the other thing that's interesting is that if you create good stuff, if you create excellent content, Google still wants to see that. They
100%.
still want it. So it's like you can still get the byproduct of it. You know, my search traffic is still doing pretty well, even if I don't focus on it. But it's basically because you created content that people wanted in the first place. So it's no longer, it's a human-oriented thing. If people want to see this stuff, they want to read it, then it's important. But I would agree with you that like an email list is important as well because, you know, for example, I'm sure you do the same thing, but I distribute my posts through email, and that gets way more engagement than a lot of other channels because it's basically finding my tribe, my group of people who want to see these things. It gets put out there, it stays in front of these people, and they find it, and then they interact with it. And so I would agree, owned channels are really important. Finding new channels that people might want to go to. I like the idea of repurposing across all kinds of different places. It's a little bit overwhelming to think about it, but I agree with you that you don't have to have necessarily a new idea per channel. You just have to understand what's unique about that channel and where you can play in it.
100%. And I think like one of the, if we were to look at kind of forward thinking, where's search going? Where's consumers going in general? I think we need to think about one of the sites that people spend the majority of their time on, and that's Facebook. Like whenever we talk about search, we ignore Facebook as a search tool, but people are starting to use that search bar to actually find content. Like they're no longer just using it to find their ex. They're no longer using it to find somebody from high school. They're using the search bar to find answers to questions. They're using it to find out what restaurants are nearby. They're using it to find great brands that they can work with. And people need to think about Facebook search as also being a relevant tool. And if you're listening to this, like I challenge you to go to your search bar on Facebook and type in recipes with bananas or something like that. And I guarantee you the results that you get back are going to compete with the value that you would get back from a Google. Like you're going to get some great recipes with bananas in them. That's going to be a fact. If you're looking for information on SaaS products or trending things about Amazon and you do a search on Facebook, you're going to get some relevant news. You're going to get some information that is interesting. So I think that Facebook search is something that we also need to think about. But outside of just search, we need to also think about the groups that exist on Facebook. Last year, for the first time, 1 billion people used groups in a single month to explore interests that were specific to them. So that's people talking about things that they care about. It could be physics, it could be gardening, it could be SaaS products, it could be coffee. But 1 billion people in a single month were spending time in Facebook groups having conversations, and that's insane. I saw on my phone a few months back that in the bottom right-hand corner, Facebook was doing some A/B testing for the groups icon. And if Facebook adds the group icon to the mobile app, I guarantee that groups are going to completely redefine the way that Facebook is used.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's been a big thing I've noticed, and I've read some people's content on this. I'll try to link to it in the show notes if I can find it. But basically, Facebook groups, it's this guy, he said his recommendation is uninstall Facebook from your phone and just install Facebook groups, and then you can take a look at them that way. Right. But I get pinged now all the time and notifications about groups. It seems like they're really heavily promoting it. Like if 2016 was the year of Facebook Live, right, it seems like from a Facebook perspective, 2017 is the groups. And it's like, it's basically my feed, my notifications, it's all about groups.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Like they want to become, like, they continuously push this idea they want to connect the world. Not everybody wants to add 5,000 people to their friends list on Facebook, but people are okay with having conversations with people who are interested in a similar kind of idea, a similar topic, a similar passion, without adding them as their friends. And groups offer a great opportunity for them to do that. Groups is really just forums, like it used to be back in the day, but it was only like us geeks using forums. Now it's the world using them in the sense of Facebook groups. And like they always say, the things that are toys to the geeks in the early days become the mainstream forms of communication in the future. And I think that that's going to be what happens with groups, where more and more people are going to continue to spend time in these channels. Like we're already at 1 billion, so it's hard for me to say it hasn't already reached like a significant amount of people, but I think it's going to continue to grow month over month for years to come.
Well, and it's user share, but then it's also share of voice too. I mean, I think it's getting more prominent as well. Right. The funny thing is, it's almost like a social commentary as well, that like we're turning to these groups because we learned that we don't always agree with our friends and family members that we have. It's like the more that I see how much I have in common with these entrepreneurship groups or analytics groups, the less I realize that the content of people that I know is what I agree. It's not even so much what I agree with. It's just sort of like I don't really care about that right now. But what I do care about is this super specific thing that's important to me at this point.
Right. And that is kind of on its own special, right? Like the fact that you can now connect with people who are like-minded, who share interests that are similar to you, that you would have never been connected to before, that's amazing. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I mean, Facebook's one of those things where I mean, there's people who specialize in marketing to Facebook, but then there's marketers who use Facebook, and there's people who use it, and it's only going to evolve how it's used, how we use it. So I've noticed it changes all the time for me as well.
And a lot of people think that Facebook is just a place for kind of like your B2C, like your brands that are going to have some amazing glamour shots. It's for the big companies of the world, the Nikes, the NFLs, the NBAs, those types of things. But in reality, there was a study that was done by ComScore a few years back. And when they asked B2B decision makers where they spent the majority of their time, 760 minutes a week were being spent on Facebook. That overcame CNN, Bing, LinkedIn, Twitter, Forbes, you name it. B2B decision makers are using Facebook. Now, they might be using it to simply connect with their friends, and they're not there thinking about business, but the fact that they're spending their time there makes a lot of sense. Like at the end of the day, whether you're talking to someone who's in the B2C world or you're talking to someone in the B2B world, we're all human. We're all people, and people use Facebook. So it does make sense that you would find those people using Facebook on a regular basis.
Absolutely. I mean, the numbers don't lie. I think that it's a misperception that it's only B2C interacting with brands. Right. I don't know about everybody else who's listening to this, but brands are a very small part of what I see or what I want to see. That's a very small piece of it. It's more like these specific areas around, specific communities. And
to your point around like groups, you go into groups where they're going to be talking about things that are relevant to you. On Facebook, you think about, okay, if I'm trying to target the C-suite executive, they're typically on Facebook and they're seeing a lot of things that aren't relevant to them, things that don't matter, that they don't care about. If you can create a piece of content that is going to talk about a specific issue that they're having in the office, in their organization, and you can inspire them to click on that, and disrupt kind of that constant feed of baby photos and cat pictures and just give them some value, they'll click on that, they'll engage with your content, and it will allow you to kind of build that relationship with somebody who you wouldn't have been able to reach otherwise.
Yep, absolutely. Facebook's been good. Everybody think if you're not using it, then you should figure out how to use it. We need to, I wouldn't mind moving on though, because one thing you said earlier that really caught my attention was SlideShare.
Yeah,
and that is. I know you as the guy who goes up on stage and speaks and does a great job, and the Twitter feed is just, the hashtag is just overflowed with love and praise and everything. So obviously you do speaking for that purpose, to have the impact of a group of 100 to 200 or 1,000, whatever the people are that you're in front of. But I can only imagine that once you're done with that, you're like, this has a whole new life when I put it onto SlideShare, when I take advantage of that platform. So what's your prep process for a speech, and then how does that transition into SlideShare?
For sure. So my speaking process has definitely evolved over the years. Right now, my approach that I go through is I essentially print off a bunch of blank slides, and then I start to kind of write out what the story is going to be with little scribbles, like I'm drawing what this slide's going to look like. I'm writing out what the word's going to be. I'm talking about, okay, this is the point in which I'm going to hook people in to kind of actually pay attention to me. These are going to be the key points that I'm going to deliver in the middle. This is how I'm going to wrap it all together at the end. So I start with kind of just printing out blank slides and writing out my story. Once I've done that, I go into PowerPoint and I put together the actual deck itself. Then I send it along to my designer, and then we collaborate on kind of figuring out what that message, what the look and feel of the decks are going to be. And then from there, I do a handful of rehearsals and practices, probably about, I'd say maybe 10 times I do a run through from start to finish. And in that, I'm iterating the presentation, I'm iterating the talk to kind of get it to a point where I'm comfortable and I'm confident. And then I record the last one. And I record the last one, so when I'm actually in transport, I can listen to myself giving that talk.
Oh, nice.
So it ingrains into my head. So when I'm on a flight going into speak at a conference, I'm actually listening to myself give that talk over and over again. A lot of people say, Ross, what are you listening to before you go on stage? It's usually myself talking through kind of the presentation, but probably within the 10 minutes before I actually hit the stage, I usually listen to some hip hop, and that gets me excited and energized to hit the stage, and then I go on. But yeah, that's the process there. Once I'm done, I think about the distribution, and the distribution is often kind of retweeting and sharing the content that people send out throughout the presentation, but also SlideShare plays a role. So I always upload my decks to SlideShare so people can see them and they can get the information directly through there. A lot of the presentations that I give actually become SlideShare presentations that take on a different form. So when I give a talk, there's a lot of value in just having a voice associated with the content. So when you get a slide deck and it's simply words, it's simply stats and facts, and it doesn't have a cohesive story, it's kind of hard to really understand what a certain point might have been when you see a slide talking about Facebook groups if you aren't able to actually hear voice with it. Yep. So what I like to do is I actually try to turn my presentations into semi-blog posts that live on SlideShare. So rather than just reading a bunch of slides that are like not connected to one another because there's no voice associated with it, I like to tell a story throughout my slides. That was one of the big insights that allowed me to kind of generate millions of views on SlideShare, because I found everybody looked at it as simply a place to upload their slides after they gave a talk. What I realized was you can use SlideShare similar to the way that you would use a video site like YouTube, where instead of trying to connect with people by simply uploading your slides from a talk that you've given, you're telling a story and you're writing this out like you would a video. So as people are clicking, you want to have a bucket brigade. As people are clicking through from one slide to the next, you want to show them why they need to keep clicking, to keep reading, and entice them to kind of want to read more, and really tell them, like, in this SlideShare deck, I'm going to share with you 5 reasons why you should do X, Y, and Z. And if you can deliver that, people tend to love it.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at my SlideShare now because you got me thinking just about how you're right. Your description is exactly what most people do, is they finish a speech, which is the end for them, right? It's like, okay, well, I had this build up. I got up on stage. I'm coming down. I'm going to at least put up these slides to get it out there. But I think that there's a certain amount of distribution that ends up happening when you do more than that, when you put it out there. I'm just looking at this is probably the worst thing you could do in a podcast, but I'm just looking at mine. I probably have like 500,000 views, but the ones that I just did this year, I think they're less than 1,000 views. But things that I did 2 or 3 years ago were at the 30, 70,000 type views.
Right. It's
amazing because there's like the hashtag traffic, right? During your conference, you can get it out there, and sometimes you can put it on the front page of SlideShare if the hashtag's strong enough.
Right.
But then you're maybe still getting a couple thousand people to look at this thing. Then it's like if you do the extra work you're talking about,
right,
and you actually spend the time to create it that's unique to the format. Now we're talking about a 10x, 100x distribution strategy.
Right. And I think one of the values of SlideShare that often gets overlooked is like once you create a deck, once you've created a presentation, you have a handful of different content assets, right? Every single slide is a content asset. And when I say content asset, I'm talking about like you can use one individual slide as a piece of content that you use in a guest blog post on a third-party site. You can use that on Instagram. You can share that on Twitter. You can share it on Facebook. You have all these different slides that can act as valuable pieces of content that you share as one-offs. And on top of that, you can embed that SlideShare deck into blog posts that you've written on another site. So if you go to a website and you write a blog post about trends that are happening in a certain space, and then you have your deck embedded at the bottom, that's going to give your deck more life, which is going to give you, again, more reach.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, it makes perfect intuitive sense, doesn't it?
It does.
I think sometimes people just, I wonder, like, do you have any thoughts on the mindset of somebody who wouldn't do this? It makes so much sense. It's put in front of us. There's a compelling reason because you've been able to do it. You've been able to grow a company. I'm guessing a big part of your lead generation strategy is speaking and sharing and everything like that. Like is it just that people give up after spending, they put 20 hours into the presentation? They don't want to put the 23rd hour into it? What do you think it is
definitely just everybody's already busy, right? Like everybody is busy. No one today in this space doesn't feel like they have a never-ending checklist of things that they need to do. So adding this to their plate, they feel like, okay, I have to drop off something else. And that is kind of like simply an adjustment in priorities. And I think that it's, at the end of the day, a challenge of getting out of your own way and saying, okay, if this is something that's important to me, I need to find a way to squeeze it into my schedule. And it goes back to our initial conversation about calendars, right? I block off time for distributing content. And that's kind of like a block of my time focused solely on doing that. And I think that that's important. Even if you're giving a presentation, block off some time around this is what I'm going to do to help distribute this. I think it's solely based on the fact that everybody's already really busy, and just adding more things to our plate is kind of intimidating for everyone and anyone.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's both blocking off time and then project management, really. I mean, that's something in my own business I'm getting better at, and that is standard operating procedures and at least checking off the things that you did when you were successful. So it may, it doesn't have to always be a superhuman expert to stand out.
No.
In fact, I think we'd all be more comfortable if it didn't take a superhuman superhuman effort to do things. But if you could build it into your process to say, hey, if I do a speech now, it's not just the speech, it's these three things afterwards. Well, at least you have a fighting chance of it being successful.
Yeah.
But if you're so busy, or if you pack your schedule too tight, or you just forget about stuff, which naturally happens, then distribution is not going to, you just won't even do it at all.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I like that a lot because I love these conversations, because even if you're doing something or something worked once, it's hard to remain consistent and to go through it. And so just hearing other people and hearing how it's working is great. And I think people who are on listening as well, like they might not even do speeches. They might never get in front of a crowd.
Right.
Doesn't mean that SlideShare couldn't be useful for you. I like 100%. What you said about how just a single slide, like one slide with like 10 words on it, can be distributed in so many different ways. And it can have so many different contexts and so many different values and ways of resonating with people. It could be Instagram, it could be a SlideShare, you could upload it there, you could put it on Facebook. All those things have different audiences, and they all do these things for different reasons.
Right.
And so to just say, well, I think it's only this place that it should go, it's selling yourself short.
Yeah. And I think we often forget that we overestimate how many people we reach with one post. Like, we think if we send out one tweet, we've reached all of our followers, when in reality, the people who are following you in the morning aren't always going to be the people who are on Twitter at night. So it's okay to redistribute that content twice on Twitter. The people who follow you on Facebook, the algorithm doesn't always show the content to everyone. So it's okay to republish a blog post that you might have shared as a link, as an article or as a note on Facebook. Like, that is okay. I've done that, and it's always blown my mind when I've written a blog post. I think that I've distributed to everyone in my network. I think everybody is probably tired of this. And then I repost it 3 months later as an article on LinkedIn, and people go crazy. And they're like, oh, this is so great. I'm like, I wrote this 6 months ago. But people are like just catching on to that content because the algorithms don't always serve it up to you. So underestimate rather than overestimate how many people your content is actually reaching. And then I think you'll actually see yourself being more intentional in your distribution efforts. Like, if you think that you're reaching 70% of your audience, you're probably only reaching 30. And with that mindset, it's going to force you to be more intentional of spreading your content rather than just posting it once and walking away.
No, I think that's a good point, because a lot of people focus so much on number or quantity of things they need to do. Like, there's all these best practices where if you don't update your blog at least once a week, then you might as well not blog. Or if you don't update it at least 5 times a week, like, there's entire books about that strategy, that you might do it this way, or we did it 31 times. There's no magic number. Ultimately, it comes down to connection and persistence. And persistence doesn't always have to be brand new stuff. Sometimes it just means that you're putting it out there and redistributing and trying new things. Because I know we're almost running out of time, but I LinkedIn distribution is an interesting one, and you mentioned it a couple times, especially from a B2B perspective. But I found that publishing things on LinkedIn, it brings a whole new audience that isn't anywhere else. Like, the LinkedIn audience is fierce, loyal, and very interesting.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I've been watching LinkedIn closely over the last little bit, studying their algorithm through the engineering blog that they have. And it's been very interesting to watch them open up the network a little bit more. So it's not just your content being seen by your network. It's now going out and reaching those second tier connections. And then if it breaks through the second tier connections, it reaches the third tier based off of how much engagement, how many likes, how many comments it's getting. And I think that that's a hugely untapped opportunity for marketers. And I think that it's one that a lot more people need to focus on. And again, like you were saying about persistence, I think that that is without question one of the most important pieces to take away from all of this. When you are trying to start a blog, when you are trying to build up a following on LinkedIn or Twitter, you don't just launch a successful Twitter account. You don't launch a successful blog. You build a successful blog. You build a successful Twitter account. And that comes from being persistent and consistently delivering value to your audience. If your first blog post gets 2 shares, that's okay. My first blog post got 2 shares. One was my mom, and one was from some random person in New York, and I was excited by that one person sharing my content. But that's where it starts, and then you have to just keep building on that over and over again and recognize that in a year's time, if you're persistent and you look back at it, you're going to be able to say without question that it was worth it because you were persistent with your content creation and delivering value to people, and people will take notice over time.
Yeah, I've noticed that people always... the biggest barrier people have is that they think that they're too late, or that the number of people who can be popular, there's a cap, like on how many people can be a publisher who can be recognized, that there's like some kind of club where like they have to be indoctrinated into it.
Right.
And it's like, well, there's already enough people in this club. I don't want to be the one in there. Yeah. First of all, there's no governing body. There's no Illuminati, although I don't know if they can scan the text. I shouldn't have mentioned that. Maybe you have to bleep that one out. Because I get all kinds of comments from the Illuminati on my blog for whatever reason. Whoever they are. But it's like this focus that it has to be perfect, or that whatever, that if they're not successful, whatever. Here's the deal. If you are just getting started in publishing, you're not going to be successful, and you wouldn't know what to do with success if it hit you anyway. Right. You actually would be so screwed if you just tried something out and the first thing you did became viral and put you on TV. Exactly. You need to build up to that point. You need to build up to the point where you're actually ready to handle these things. And so starting in the minor leagues and then working your way up is the way to go, right? 100%. It's not like, it's like, we could do the fantasy football analogy, but it's like, if you're a high school quarterback, no, don't worry. You're not going to get signed by the NFL right away. You need to go through the steps in order to get to that point. And so, yeah, some people are natural talents. That's fine. And if you don't have that natural talent, you probably already know that. Doesn't mean you have to compare yourself to them. There's enough room for successful people. In fact, I want more. That's why I do this podcast, because I want to see more successful people out there. That's why you speak, Ross, and why you do all you do, right? Because you want to see more people be successful.
100%.
Awesome. Well, I think this is a great way to end it, and some inspiration for people out there who are sitting on the sidelines or not sure what they're going to do. There's room for you, and Ross and I will welcome you.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I love seeing people kind of find out what they're interested in, understand that there is enough space for anyone in any space, any industry. You just need to be willing to work for it and put in the time and the effort to kind of fine-tune your craft and really kind of get closer to turning those dreams into reality. And I think it's possible, regardless of your background, regardless of where you're from. I want to see more people become successful. And it's only by doing things like this. So, Jeff, thank you for having me on the show and getting a chance to kind of share my story and share some insights. I hope the listeners have been able to get some great takeaways that they can apply to their business, to their careers, that can really help elevate their own business, both personally and their life in general. So thank you again for having me on. It's been a blast.
What an awesome guy. If you're like me, your to-do list just expanded by a few more points from having listened to Ross. I love Ross's tips about cross-promoting your content to other channels. Even after the call was done, Ross gave me an awesome idea for the redistribution of my content through SlideShare. Basically, embed slides on my guest posts. It's an awesome strategy for getting more views and increasing the reach of your best ideas. It's all about making little adjustments to your approach to get better results. And it's funny, I was talking to him about how one of my slide shares had 70,000 views of it, and it's actually the one that I embedded on a guest post that I posted on Moz. And so that's both a testament to that method working, another thing saying that I should do it more often, and finally, a testament to the value of cross-posting on Moz in the first place. You can't help but want to root for Ross to keep on succeeding after hearing this interview. He's a super engaging, super motivated entrepreneur, and his time management ideas make a lot of sense as well. And you should also note that there's room for more of you in the Content Club. Finally, you can tell that Ross has read a lot of stories along the way. His third act, from going freelancer to agency to starting his own business as an agency, is a model that anybody can follow. And it's actually something that I've followed myself. If you're ever stuck on a problem, your solution may reside in the literature from the past. Thanks for the chat, Ross. I managed to make it all the way through the podcast without mentioning the wildness that happened after the MN Search Summit. But I know a few listeners were along for that ride. The rest of you? You're just going to have to make it to Minnesota next June to see it firsthand. For show notes, visit jefflytics.com/thecoolestcool.